There we go. Great. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us this morning and for joining me for this talk. This one is going to be a bit more abstract than some of the last things that we heard about. A lot of awesome progress that the team has made over the past period of time since we had BlinkOn 10. First of all, a little bit about me. My name is Ben Goodger. I'm the Director of Engineering for Web Platform here at Google. And so that covers like a large number of different teams working on platform tech. And so the purpose of this talk is to walk through kind of the mindset that animates the technology investments that we make as a team. And some of this is sort of a walk through time, a walk through history, and understanding a bit about the history of the platform and what its strengths are. And then just highlighting some of the things that are important to us as a platform team at Google, and why it is that we are making the investments that we're doing as we form teams, as we develop tech, and you'll see this, as you engage with us in Chromium. So, yeah. So going back in time, and I'm going to start with the 1990s, best represented by this graphic that I found. And I think at the beginning of the 1990s, we had reached a point where there had been this really massive transformation in computing that was driven by the rise of personal computing, commoditization of hardware, development of standards, and the ability for people to access technology, to be able to go out and buy a personal computer either for their office or their home or their kids. And we had new operating systems like DOS and Windows that made it more accessible and easier to use for people. And so it was this really interesting moment. And then also, of course, with the development of networking technology, making it easier to connect things together. And I remember as a kid, myself using my modem, going out there and finding BBSs. I was inspired by Anil's talk earlier this week at CDS, talking about how he would get online and find out things about the stuff that he was interested in. And sort of around the same time, there was this other hardware development with the CD-ROM that dramatically changed people's expectations of the type of computing experience that you could get. And I remember in that early 90s period, you would get a PC, it would have between 20 and 60 megabytes of disk storage space, perhaps. And so there's kind of a limit to what you could do with that. And maybe you could have some spreadsheets and you could have some Word documents and stuff like that. But you wouldn't be able to do anything too visually interesting unless you're going to create your own graphics. But then the CD-ROM came along, and it was 10x that amount of storage in this little plastic disk. And so then you ended up with all different types of information. People coming up with what we call multimedia, video, rich graphics, high-resolution graphics, audio. And you see with some of the early CD-ROM encyclopedias, this sort of transformation of people's expectation about what technology could mean for them. Now, I don't know if any of you had like an actual physical encyclopedia in your house, so they're kind of expensive. They took up a lot of space. If you wanted to go find something or learn something about them, it's kind of like going to the library. You have to go to the card catalog, you sift through the index, find the right book to go and get, and then go get the other book. It's kind of a pain. And then even then, you don't get video. So you have to read about something. You can't see it. It's not, and so CD-ROM changed all of that. But there were some challenges with that too, that you still had to go out and buy it. And you had to go to a store, you could order one via catalog. And then you had to go find it and put it on your computer and wait for it to kind of spin up, and then use some UI to go and sift through the stuff that was on it. And because the people that produced these, you kind of had to have a business model associated with being able to sell and ship these to people. And so you can imagine an encyclopedia company constructing that, but maybe it's too heavyweight for smaller pieces of information or much more dynamic pieces of information. And so there's some limitations here. It's not like maximally inclusive in terms of who can publish through it. And so like that was an issue. But then along came the web. And the web had this sort of, and I don't know if anyone was around in the 1990s, you will remember people using this term a lot. But really it was the idea that there was all of this information that currently you didn't have, and it would be brought right into your house. and it was going to be amazing. It was going to be dynamic. It was going to be exciting. And I remember that time, like I was a teenager and I was like playing with building my own websites, and it was just this it was like sitting on the frontier of something fundamentally new. I imagine like it must have been what the Wild West felt like, or to the people that were moving into new territory. And so I think the amazing thing about this was that not only was there this community of people who were pulling things together and publishing things online, but it was also open, and anyone could do it. And it didn't matter if you had access to the ability to produce your own CDs at scale and send them out to people like AOL. But like you could make your own page of anything that you were interested in. It didn't matter how esoteric or how like silly, you could just do it. And so that was really cool. And so then we ended up with these things that were like trappings of the UIs that would come attached to CD-ROMs. Like you'd have your sort of card catalog here, your directory, your way to go and find stuff that was there. And then like if you wanted to make your page, you could go and like go to a service like this and get your own URL and go and put all of your interesting thoughts and so on. And then like when you wanted to find things that wasn't in the directory, you could go and like look it up. And it was really great to get around. So what do those things mean for like what was interesting, what was transformative about this model of computing? And it really is a different model of computing to what came before. And from my perspective, as someone who, and well, it's a little bit risky to admit this, perhaps, given what team I'm on and what I do, but I don't really like technology. I find a lot of times it is you heard the term leaky abstraction. There's this idea that we as the developers of software come up with some model for how the world works, and then we impose it on you. And then you as a user have to figure out kind of how our mind works. And the great thing about the web, for me at least, was that it worked the way my mind worked. That I could just go out and start exploring and just sort of randomly go off down tangents and stuff like that. And thinking about that, on the Chrome team, about 5 years ago, we were thinking we should try and find a way to articulate what this is. Because a bunch of us had the same thought. Like, we love some of these properties of the web. We wanted to document them and understand them so that we could sort of lean into them more as we figure out what to do next. And so I'm going to talk about some of those things that we wrote down. And the first one is that the web is linkable, and that everything has a URL, and that you can, not just not just each document, but the connections between the documents, the thing that powers that kind of serendipitous exploration. But then the ability also to share, to take one of those things and either put it into your page or to send it to a friend via chat or email, or stick it on the back of a bus. And so that's pretty powerful. Now, Google, of course, we're a search engine company, so we're very interested in this property. But a fundamental nature of the web, the document format, is this declarative markup, the ability to sort of understand what the text is doing, understand the relationship between documents, try and compute importance, gather signals from that. Indexability is really important if you want to power that type of mode where you could just have a thought and go from the moment of having that thought to having the answer or accomplishing the task in a minimum amount of time. And then composability. And I think this is something that is really, it's not entirely unique to the web, but the web has taken composability to this really interesting place that I think is quite unique. And that you can go back to the beginning of the web and look at the ability to mix text with links and text with images and other stuff in early browsers. But then, through the late 90s, early 2000s, the development of technology like iframe and XHR and other things has really built and powered this property. The web is the platform that invented the mashup, and this is really what composability is. And then lastly, I think this is one of the most interesting from a user perspective properties of the web, compared to a world in which I have to go out and buy software and bring it home and install it and that type of thing, and then I'm stuck with it and maybe it doesn't work. There is this aspect of ephemerality where if I use these other properties to find something that I want, and then I access this content and I decide I don't want it, then it's gone. And it's great. It's because it's kind of, again, like how my mind works. I don't need to go through this process of organizing things that much. I can just be very serendipitous. I can just sort of show up and find the things I need and then throw them away and move on. And I can also be somewhat secure in knowing that because of linkability, they'll still be there. I can still get back to them, but they don't need to like take up space on my computer or that sort of thing. So these properties, what do they leave us with? I think we can do better as an acronym than that. Coming to the early 2000s, I think one of the things we recognized as a community, and especially on the Chrome team, or at the foundation of the Chrome team, was that there was this property that was missing. And all of those other properties kind of imagine this world of computing that's kind of, if you've read the article As We May Think by Vannevar Bush, it described this sort of mode of very serendipitous mode of computing. It requires a security model that supports that, so that when you click a link, that link can be really side effect free, that you're not left with stuff lurking around on your computer and doing nasty things. And so that has been a significant, from the founding moment of Chrome, been a significant area of focus for us, and it influences our whole architecture of our app. You have things like the multi-process architecture, but then even more recently, as we've extended that architecture to site isolation and being able to push iframes out, and then to investments across the team, it's kind of the thing that infuses everything that we're doing. It's like focusing on trying to create a really safe experience for people. And so that brings us to a better acronym, SLICE. And so about 5 years ago, we came up with this, and then we've been just sort of chewing on it. And this is one of the things that we keep in the back of our minds as we develop strategy. And so there we go. Yep, we've been doing a lot on the security front. And so as we look at what we do next, let's try and make it more specific. Well, if we were to ask people on the team, what are we here to do? I mean, the highest level, maybe the vaguest thing is we're trying to make the web better. But we can dive into that a bit and try and get a bit more understanding as to how we think about that and what it means. And first of all, I just want to talk about as an open source project, we work on a lot of different tech. There's a lot of code. A lot of that code is really amazing, and it powers lots of different experiences, both on the web and off of it. And that's really awesome. I started out in my career as a software developer as an open source contributor. So I think it's amazing the extent of the community and the fact that we can continue to grow that. When I think about what the Chrome team does at Google, it is primarily that we work on what I call the big W web, which is that network of connected links. And as a part of doing that, we build a lot of technology that we make available open source that people come up with other interesting applications of. And that's great. But our focus is primarily on the web. And so, like I said, when I think of the web, I think of it as stuff found at links. And so moving on from that, when I think about our vision and our strategy, it's basically to make links better. And it is to be even more specific, to improve the interactive quality of stuff that you find at links. And we talked a bit earlier about performance and a lot of the changes that we've done there, but also not just performance, there's many dimensions of user experience. There's a lot of stuff that we do there to fundamentally try and improve the user experience of browsing. And then the other side of that is to just enable more stuff to be found at links. And so a lot of the work that we do in expanding the capabilities of the platform, and then also improving the developer experience to empower developers to create more stuff more quickly, is animated by that idea. And again, thinking about the fact that Google is a search company, we have that aspect to it. A lot of our focus is on public content and services, and specifically also in services and e-commerce, and there are things like that we like to work on and try and make better. E-commerce is a real strength of the web. It's a core use case. But then also, Google is an application company, and we've built significant pieces of software like Maps and G Suite and so on. There's many advanced app use cases, and the web, because of that kind of serendipitous discovery, that sort of the ability to virally throw a link at someone and have it get discovered and spread, there's good use cases there for even more advanced software. And I think at this point, I should also mention that I described that transformation of computing in the 1980s that powered enabled the growth of the web. But then, like about 10 years ago, there's been this another transformation that's even more profound and has significantly expanded the reach of technology beyond just the people that we know pretty well and in many of the geographies that we live in and the people that we talk to, but across the world. The rise of mobile has changed not just the hardware or the input modalities, but it's also fundamentally changed the way that people interact with technology. And for a long time, I heard people saying that, and I didn't really understand it. And then eventually you kind of have to look and see. One of the things that I thought was interesting is I often go and talk to kids about technology and how to get involved and that type of stuff. And I went to talk to a class of middle schoolers, and I was talking to them about browsers, and I got a sense that they didn't know what I was talking about. So I stopped and asked them if who in the room knew what an app was, and all their hands go up. And then I asked them like who knew what a browser was, and about 1/5 of the hands in that room went up, which led me to have this sort of epiphany of like, yeah, this next generation of people and the people who are discovering tech for the first time in general across the world using this form factor are discovering it and interacting with it in very different ways than we did on desktops and laptops and so on. So looking at the specific things that we're trying to do on the team to address this change, I think some of this, maybe it sounds broad or it could apply to desktop as well, but I think it's especially important on mobile. For end users, consumers, there's still just way too much friction. Like Rick put up information before about like where FID is at, and about like roughly 1 in 20 page loads having FID of 300 milliseconds. Wow, that's really long. I mean, it's supposed to be, what, 16? 50 at least, yeah. It's supposed to be much lower than 300, and so there's a lot of work that we still have to do on performance. And I would say, also reflected in our strategy is this shift to think beyond just Chromium and think about how people are building apps and experiences on the web. And a lot of that is through really popular frameworks and engaging there, trying to make sure that people are able to take advantage of the work that we've done in evolving the developer platform over the past few years as a web community. So there's a bunch of stuff that we need to do there, and we need to recognize that it involves, it's not just us. Certainly there's a lot of still low-hanging fruit in areas of the engine where we can eke out a bit more performance. But if we focus just on that, we'll also miss this huge opportunity that we have with the developer ecosystem to really improve the performance, the experience that people have at scale. It's not just performance, it's also things like key flows, like authentication, sign-in, payment. As I browse around, I get like this thing all the time asking me if I want to accept notifications. Like there's a lot of friction in browsing. And so I think there's a lot of things that we can do to improve that and just make browsing more snappy, more pleasant, something that people want to do and not have that end of the month drop in Japan, maybe. And then like thinking about who creates content for the web, there's a lot of different, I mean, of course there's individuals and that type of thing, but we think a lot about businesses as well. And one of the drivers for businesses is their confidence that they can address both the markets and the use cases that they need to in order to be successful and achieve their business goals. And so I think here, a lot of our focus is on just closing gaps. If there's a gap, if they can't, implement access some new API that the device offers, that all of the, that they feel will give them a business edge, we need to close that gap. And then lastly, for developers, is it too much to ask for to get back to that sort of 1990s level of simplicity of development? Maybe it is. Maybe it's just the platform is massively more powerful now than it was back then. But I think we can do a lot better. One of the realizations for me is that as a web engine, we don't necessarily have a direct connection to our developers. We don't have as much of a direct connection as a traditional, like if you have a company that develops a platform and then they engage with the developers directly. We do a bit of that, but it's not, one of the beauties of the web is that no one owns it, but at the same time, like who is responsible for telling me what to do. And then there's lots of different opinions, and that's also great. Like I see it as kind of a beautiful chaos, but we can also try and help people by understanding what they're trying to do, and at least be like a good guidepost, and showing them what best practices are. And if you're using this framework or that framework, these are the ways to get that, to create that great user experience and to generate those business results. So yeah. And so, as I think of all of this, a lot of this is not us trying to be something that we're not us trying to invent some new thing, but really just to understand those properties. This is a slice, by the way. It's just a different, not pizza. To recognize those properties that make the web awesome, and figure out how to continue to amplify them. I would say one thing that's been particularly inspiring for me, over the past 10, 15 years or so, is to see this sort of rise in more sophisticated experiences that people can deliver through the web, and then use that power of the link to gain viral adoption. Like, I've heard so many anecdotes of people, individuals, discovering the value of something like Google Docs, and going and creating content and then sharing it with their friends just by like pinging them a link in chat, and then their friends coming online and discovering it, and then like them starting to use it for their own things. And you also see that in businesses, where someone in the business will be like the person zero that starts using a tool like this. And then it kind of propagates virally throughout the company as people discover it's great. And so I see there's this massive power in the platform, an opportunity for us to take. And part of this was like, I'm used to using all of these tools because I work at Google, and we use all of this type of stuff internally, and it's so amazing. And I think about how productivity is so much different now than it was 20 years ago, and how much easier it is to work with people across many different time zones, across many different locations. And so I see us as having this opportunity to really fundamentally transform the way people come together, the way people collaborate, and just the way we work. And so much of our strategy also is infused by that. And I think all of that is really built on this foundation of the web, these slice properties. But there's a lot that we have to do to unlock that and make it real. So yeah, that's kind of a high level. And actually, it's the end of my content. So we have a little bit of extra time as well, in case people have questions. Any questions? Yes.
I think one of the properties that you might want to add to this slice. I was saying one of the properties that you might want to add to your slice is for developer the ability to copy the web. I think the fact that you can sort of look at a web page and then take a part of it, and then maybe it's the composability, but change it, add to it, mash it together. Mm-hmm. But always start from something. You're never starting from scratch, from zero. Is probably part of what made it so popular in the 90s and still makes it popular. Yeah, I remember we had a guest speaker come into the San Francisco office a while ago, and had a great talk about sort of the early days, and how like there was this very strong like view source, and like rip this piece of code and put it into that piece of code thing. It's become a bit more complicated just due to all of the layers of the stack. And then I know from like, I'm sure everyone here who's worked on debugging a production app, that's all being gone through JavaScript compilation and minimization and all that type of stuff. It can be a little bit harder now to figure out what's happening, but that aspect of, I kind of see it as composability. It's the ability just to pull building blocks together. And I know there's been like so much research over the years in developing module systems and so on, but like the web has this as its core. So it's kind of it's a great thing. I agree.
Hi, great talk. Thanks. You mentioned talking about improving the web ecosystem as a whole, maybe potentially reaching out to more popular libraries and doing some work there. What are kind of the initiatives that the Chrome team or Google has taken as a whole to approach that problem?
Yeah, that's a good question, and there'll be some folk here today that are more sort of into the details that can give you like very fine-grained specifics. But I know, like in the slides earlier, you would have seen a summary of some of the contributions that we've made to Next.js, for instance. And that's not to say that we are interested only in Next.js, but just that that's an engagement that we've started. There's many other popular frameworks like Vue and Angular and so on. I think we would love to find ways to work across as many of them as we can to understand what their needs are, what problems they're seeing, and like where can the knowledge that we have working on this web engine and knowing something about certain practices that will get good performance or provide access to capabilities that people want, and then just try and bring that experience in and make positive contributions to those frameworks. So we started to do that, and we saw some impact of that for how that had impacted a specific like e-commerce site. But I think there's a lot more that we can do, and we intend to do that.
Hi. One question about mobile and web versus native. At the developer conference earlier the week, it was said that, okay, on desktop, web is really, really strong, but on mobile, there's actually so much happening in apps, and even the share of web seems to be decreasing. Should web try to sort of copy from native or adopt features, functionalities? Should web try to be like native? Is that a direction that you're seeing? Or if not, what are the unique strengths of web that instead should be pursued further?
That's a good question. I think at a high level, I can't adopt a sort of like one-size-fits-all approach. I think there are some cases where we should learn from native frameworks and understand things that they do well, and try and bring that understanding into the relevant parts of the web stack to make sure it either has the right capabilities or performance that developers expect. But it's going to be nuanced. It's going to be sort of understanding where the needs are. I think a lot of the challenge on mobile, frankly, just continues to be performance. And so that's an area where we need to continue to invest. And I think as I said before in the talk, we need to recognize that that goes beyond just the work that we do directly in Chromium into how the developer ecosystem is building content, and try and help them build experiences that work better in places where people are. I think at that point we have reached the end of the time slot for this. So thank you all.